Welcome to Cover Book Meet. I'm your host, Roger Nichols, and this is author interview number 862. Our guest today, Randy Susan Meyers, checks all the boxes for this interview. Internationally best-selling author, 5 books, check. Her books exploring domestic drama, societal issues, cultural nuances, check. And despite years of working with community and governmental agencies, the most insight into family and other politics during 4 years bartending in a small Boston neighborhood pub, double check. And sublime for this old DJ, curating Spotify playlists to accompany reading the book. Game, set, match. Particular regards to her latest book, The Many Mothers of Ivy Puddingstone. We are extraordinarily pleased to welcome Randy Susan Meyers. Welcome.
Hello. Hello.
Well,
It's so nice to meet you and to be here. Thank you for having me.
oh, indeed. There are so many unique aspects to this book. And for one, the only book I've read that uses a Venn diagram to show the relationships of its characters. And then to have the book exploring the difficulty that characters have with their relationships. Very intriguing. Um, Now, I have to talk about the Spotify list. Again, as an old disc jockey, there are 92 songs, most of them well known, but you also throw in some deep cuts. And there's some three Leonard Cohen's, three Richie Havens, a whole bunch of other fun stuff. And I have to ask how you put this together with different sections of the book. I understand some of it because you actually allude to some of these people during the actual book. But what was going through your mind when you put all this together?
Well, I had well finished the book when I put it together. So I had the entire trajectory of the whole story in front of me. And it was really much more emotional than didactic how I put it together. I kind of, the first thing I did was just write down all the songs that I remembered the most from my past and that were the most iconic to me, starting with probably Marvin Gaye, one of the iconics, Bob Dylan, remembering when I was 17 years old and I was in Greenwich Village with my then boyfriend at the corner of West 4th Street. Very famous, iconic place. And he said, "Stay here." And he went into a record shop and he came out with Nashville Skyline album and said, "This made me think of you." And so that was in my head. All of that. And so I kept writing down and then knowing I would forget many, 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 I then started Googling, but I started with my heart and then Googled, and then I only included songs that meant something to me. And then I included songs from more current, the ones that would be more meaningful to Ivy
Mm-hmm.
or her generation. And one of the ones that really got to me and I have fallen in love with is I Ain't Your Mama by J-Lo. And that kind of spoke to the rise of feminism that's covered throughout the book. And I fell in love with that song, and now that's on my playlist.
Mm-hmm.
Then once I had reached over 50, I made it and kept adding. And then I put it out to my newsletter, which
Oh.
is a lot of people. And I said, "What would you add to this?" And the people who I actually use your songs, the first 10 will get an early copy of my book.
Wait.
So I actually ended up with over 90, and most of them are pretty iconic. Eric Anderson, Thirsty Boots. I mean, these are Richie Havens. I used to go to Richie Havens concerts. Leonard Cohen. I mean, it's really me in a,
Yeah.
in a nutshell.
I love that about you because it's like when you go into somebody's house and you check out their books on their shelf to see what they're like. The music taste is probably even more revealing as far as I'm concerned. So again, I speak as somebody who's an old disc jockey with 80,000 songs on his iTunes, so I know where you come from. So I have to ask this too. Was there an incident or a series of incidents that led you to write The Many Mothers of Ivy Puddingstone?
Yes, there was in fact an inciting incident. Every one of my books has started with a spark, like one spark that just ignited it all. And with this one, I was at a reunion for folk who lived in Mission Hill, which is where the book is set, Mission Hill, Boston, and where I raised my children and lived for multitudes of years. And I was talking with two women friends who were, slightly older than me, and I said, "Oh my God, remember when we started that commune for the kids? They had had a commune in Mission Hill, and they then started one in Vermont and took turns going to see the kids. And they laughed about it and said the kids still make fun of them for it, and nothing bad happened. But I took that idea and I said, oh my God." And the entire book grew out of that spark.
Sweet, because and we don't want to give away any major plot points, but basically, you've got the world is seen through two main characters, and you start. I have to praise you on one quick thing. One of the toughest things about writing is to getting the background material smoothly integrated into the narrative. And opening as you do with a really wonderful narrative, and then finding out at the end that this is part of the admissions pro a college, it's perfect setup for it because the college doesn't know anything about your characters. And so we're leaning over the shoulder of the college admission guy, reading along with them. It's brilliant. I just want to compliment you on that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I struggle. I teach writing too, and I struggle to reach that point, especially in my beginnings and my ends, where I can feel it in my stomach. It's like, okay. And if I don't feel that click, that I've satisfied myself, I just have to keep going until I get that click.
Yeah. Indeed. So this is Ivy, the daughter, and one of the main two characters is applying to this, and then right after that, you flash back to Annabel, her mother's story, and then right smack, it's right in the exact middle of the book. It switches to viewpoints to Ivy. So you've got this real parallax to give you all this interesting background.
I love multiple points of view as long as it's not too many.
Yeah.
I love entering the characters, and I write from the inside out. And when I talk to students, I say, there are many methods. There's no one right method, but there are books that I know are more of a cool book, meaning that there's a distancing, which is fine. It's a method. And then there's the more hot book, which you feel the inside. And that's how I write, very much so. While I'm writing each character, I am that character. And then when I switch to the other character, I am that character. So, and I believe that you can't write a point of view character unless you can find their soul, and everybody's the star of their own show.
Oh yeah.
So, for instance, when I wrote The Widow of Wall Street, which is a roman à clef based on the Madoff case, I had to write from the husband's point of view along with the wife.
Mhm.
And I had to see, can I find where he's the star of his own show? Can I find his humanity? And I did. So therefore I was able to write it.
Yeah, that's cool. Or is there more of you in Annabelle or Ivy?
Hmm. I think there's more of me in terms of the timing in Annabelle.
Mhm.
There's plenty of me in Annabelle, the sort of more sardonic side, the more, you know, two sides looking at things with two points of view, the inside Annabelle and the outside Annabelle. And that's me. I'm very much two people.
Mhm.
The part of me that's Ivy is the mother-daughter struggle,
Mhm.
in terms of my stuff with my mom. I have two daughters, but we're very, very close. And as far as I can tell, we don't have that kind of a thing. So I brought both into them. And I have no problem writing about the hardships of motherhood completely honestly, because I love my daughters so much and they know it. And whatever I write, they go, "Oh, she's not talking about me."
Mhm.
So
Good.
I'm I'm able to do mother and daughter. So I felt them both.
Indeed. And the part of it where you took the fact that they made this commune up in Vermont and they sent the kids up there and had a couple of people there that were all the time, and then they would come and visit. There's a lot of resentment on the part of the kids for the situation, abandonment issues, if you will. And you didn't have any of that in your own life at all.
No, I had a lot of abandonment issues in my life.
Oh, okay.
And so, I don't know if you know the writer Tayeri Jones,
I,
Silver Sparrow,
mhm.
American Marriage. Anyway, she's a brilliant writer. And I heard her speak once, and she said, "You don't have to be in an avalanche to write about one, but it helps if you've been stuck in an elevator."
Okay, oh, that's great.
So I was never, sent to a commune, but there was my father died when I was 9 years old, and he had drug problems, and my mother was a party girl, and I was home alone an awful lot of the time. My sister and I have big memories sitting on the fire escape in Brooklyn,
Mm.
watching like fires and buildings across the street. And I was sent to camp every year. My mom lied about my age, so I was. She said I was 6, but I was 5. Actually, I loved camp. It was the best time of my life.
Mm.
But I could pull in the push pull of all of that. So yes, I did use those abandonment issues,
Mhm.
and then twist them around. You just need to take little grains and then blow them up.
Yeah, indeed. Um, One of the things that I was loving is there's some really creative chapter titles in here. Most people just blow past those, but I've learned to look at those. I think my favorite is, I'm just looking at my cheat, 1,000 crusted pots of chili. For some reason, that just this is an image of somebody who's washed dishes before can relate to.
I actually thought of, when you're young, especially back then, and you're looking at apartments,
Mhm.
and some of them are so nasty, especially when you're looking in your very tiny amount that you can spend. And it's like a lot lines like that just come to me, but it's evocative of when you can see the past in a dirty kitchen.
Mhm.
And you can almost imagine. And also, when I lived in a group house in Berkeley long, long ago, when I was very young, um, I'm very obsessive about having things be clean. So I gave Annabel that trait. But when you live in a group house in Berkeley, which is just random people, you don't get that clean. And I
Mhm.
used to try and try and try. And people used to throw their pots in the sink while I was washing dishes.
Uh,
So I probably pulled up that memory.
yeah, well, all that we do, all of our experiences go into what we produce. This week. Also, I found it interesting that Roundhouse, that's the name of the place up in Vermont, doesn't come into till halfway through the book, and when you do the shift here, and then you get a lot of back and forth on it. Sorry, I'm babbling, but I just enjoy the heck out of it so much. There's so much going on here. I have to ask about characters. A lot of authors I talk to write backstories for the characters. They never show up in the book themselves, but that gives them a handle on what they are. Do you do that?
No,
No, you don't
I
need to.
I write a character Bible.
Hmm.
I write a character Bible, so I have like a multi page document where I have all the characters. I write about them. They're basic, so I don't have them have blue eyes in one chapter and green eyes in another. And
Right.
I do all of that. I used to try to I do the backstory, but it's more like write a 2 paragraphs about them, who they are, and then I enter them. Even the smaller characters.
Mhm.
So I guess I do a backstory, but it's really just a bit of narrative about everybody, so I know them, but without sounding like I'm really off my rocker. Um, they really inhabit me, all of them. And even though it seems like when I'm on a show like this, people think I'm very outgoing, but actually, what I spend most of my time doing is reading,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
am just a book person. And I'm an internal person. And you know how there are external processors and internal processors? I'm
Mhm.
an internal processor. Never been to a therapist, blah, blah, blah. Should have gone many times. But those characters, they're all just inhabit me for the whole course of the book. They all live inside me.
Now, I've had authors, about half of the authors I talk to tell me that they will be writing something and the character will tell them, no, I didn't do that. That's not me. And they'll change it. Never happened to you.
It's more like when I'm writing a story unfurls.
Hmm.
So it's like with Diantha, who's one of the you know, minor, major character. She doesn't have a voice. She just unfurled and changed within the whole course of the book, which is what I like. I like when characters grow.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm a huge outliner. I'm not a pantser, I'm a plotter,
Mhm.
but that's for the story.
Yeah.
That's for the plot
Yeah.
and the story. But in terms of how it happens, that's my surprises that I let happen and that I just enter the zone and love it. I love writing.
I can tell somehow, and that shines through in the writing too as well. I'm just going to share one of my favorite quotes these days because you mentioned you're a reader, and my favorite quote is, "Of course you don't have enough shelves for your books. If you did, you wouldn't be worth knowing."
I have a book that I bought. I buy so many books. I have a book that's called Decorating with Books because I have come to a point in my life where I use books like as plant stands and I just have them all over in every room and they're just my life. And I have books that I've carried around. I have some very old books that are the most meaningful to me.
Look, which leads obviously into who's your inspiration, who moves you when you read them as an author.
One of my favorite writers is Rosalind Brown,
Mm.
and she does multiple points of view. She wrote Tender Mercies, which is old and a fabulous old book. And she wrote Before and After, which was made into a movie. I read it years before, and Before and After. There are two books I read fairly often to remind myself of how to do a point of view from a younger person.
Mm.
One is Before and After by Rosalind Brown, and the other is Mosquito Coast by Paul Theroux,
Yeah.
one of my all-time favorite books. And another one is Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones. And those are all writers who I would call pretty inspirational to me.
Mhm. That's fascinating to see because I would have guessed just looking at you might those might be some of the ones that would because of your style. So every once in a while, the old man gets it right. Yeah.
Very
Um,
good.
one of the thing I had so many. Now I take notes when I read, and I have 8 pages of notes, and I won't go over all of them, but I did want to shout out to when I got to Happy Birthday, Ivy Ivy, Bo Ivy, Banana Fana, Faux Ivy. I went, okay, Shirley Ellis, The Name Game, 1963, old DJ. I just love that. Thank you so much.
And you know what I love is when these things, as a writer, and as you know, when things just pop into your head. It's not like I was like, oh, what would it be? It's just like it just I don't know where it comes from, and
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for it.
Well, it pops. It draws attention to itself and go, oh, this lady is really cool. So appreciate that. The same as looking again. I'm looking through my pages after pages of next, um, and I love the fact that without going into the detail why this is important, but I love that Poppy's Jewel is the name that Ivy gives to her New York store. That has some resonance to the plot, which I can't tell you about, but read the book. You will love it and enjoy it. Enjoy it. Um, the other thing is, well, you have people here who may have trouble expressing their love, and I'm thinking of the older generation. Sometimes expressing it not in terms that they understand, but the kids don't necessarily understand, and I think that's an interesting disconnect there.
I think there's a lot here in terms of disconnect. Um, I For me, some of the most poignant stuff was Ivy trying to express to her mother that she felt abandoned, but she couldn't say it outright. And her mother couldn't really hear it. And how Ivy found, and I don't want to spoil my own stuff, but found
Yeah,
a sort of sardonic way to get across to her mother what a bizarre place you sent me to.
yeah.
But she found the language that her mother would hear. And I try to think about how did I come up with that? I'm thinking about that right now. And I remember totally different but connective emotional tissue. When my mother was being hard to manage, I would manage her by saying, "Whoa, Mom, I just need to say this. You look so pretty today." My mother was very vain and looks for everything to, and it worked every single time. So Ivy knows that for her mother, politics and social justice is the
Mhm.
important thing, and she uses it.
Yeah. Finding the key sometimes to the
Mhm.
relationship, it will make it happen. There's so much going on here, and yet I feel there's more story to this. Do we have more coming for the same match?
More coming from
From
these folks.
the same characters, yes.
I have never revisited characters. I often have been thought about it, but I think the thing I'm working on now is taking the whole social justice save the world and blowing it up even bigger.
Ah, okay. So,
That's I think that's where, in terms of, I love to take that idea of save the world and I'm bringing a magical quality into it. But just like how in the commune, even though they're dedicated to social justice, they end up fighting about housework and, having a house meeting about monogamy. Should we have sex with each other, or not? So I like the idea of behind the face of the saints. It's just
mhm.
the same old stuff
Yeah,
that we all have.
exactly, exactly. And there are, and I will say this without giving things away, there are some real major plot surprises in this book. And I have the feeling that a couple of the times you were sitting there and it came out, you went, oh, and you chortled as you were typing. Does that happen to you?
There are times when I get a kick out of it. There was one scene in particular. It wasn't a tragic scene, but it was like a holy cow
Okay.
scene. And I don't think, actually, this probably won't give anything away because we know that Annabel has IB. It's when she discovers she's pregnant.
Yes.
And that whole thing about having to, and one of my chapter headings is pregnancy math,
Yeah.
and that one was, I got a lot of enjoyment out of writing that one.
What kind of feedback do you get? You've got a lot of fans out there. Do they give you feedback on a regular basis?
You mean while I'm working, or?
Yeah, both. Both.
Well, this book hasn't come out yet, but
Oh,
people
okay.
who have read the early one, are
Mhm.
have told me, and it's really pleased that they feel, I love all your books, but this one is the best. So that's been really, really, really nice. And some of my best feedback came from a writer friend, Ellen Mirapol,
Mhm.
and she wrote a review, and she said how she was afraid to read it because she goes into any books about that time with a real, almost sour attitude because people don't get it right. And Ellie is a very politically active person. She
Oh,
and uh, her husband is one of the sons of the Rosenbergs.
oh, wow.
So they
Wow.
come from serious political background.
Yeah.
And so she was like, oh my God, what if this, she got it wrong? Um, and she loved it. And she said it touched her more than that. Rarely has a book touched her as much as this did. So that was probably the most important feedback I've gotten so far.
And it is amazing. There are places in this what I had to stop and go, oh my God. Did that just happen? And go back and read it again, which
Oh,
is a tribute to the author. Absolutely. Yeah.
thank you so much. Because I know when I'm reading, which is constantly, or
Yes.
watching TV, which holds my husband and I together,
Yeah.
liking the same shows, I can't stand when I guess what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it happens so often. When you read a lot, you often know, oh, now this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So I work very hard to surprise myself and then hopefully surprise the reader.
Yeah. What I like about it is that I don't see, you can tell sometimes authors writing the book and then they go back and say, oh, I need this to happen. And they go back and insert a plot point early on so they can refer to it later. And when it's done right, you go, wait a minute, yes, they did. When it's done wrong, you go, I see where this is going. I know what's going to happen because they put that in there. So you passed all of that. So not a problem with that. I I just have so much fun diving into these characters and starting to think about each one of them and what they bring to the novel. And I'm sure you do the same.
Oh, yes. If a book really, really works for me, I remember so much about it. My favorite book growing up was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I read it when I was very young. And even though our lives were very different, there were many things about Francie and her father and mother that echoed
Mhm.
for me. And I love that book so much that I write about it a lot. And one of my peak readerly moments is I got an email from Betty Smith, the author's granddaughter.
Oh, wow.
And she wrote, I read what you wrote. It was in Huffington Post. It wasn't like it was
Yeah.
like, splashed in the New York Times. And I just want you to know that my grandmother would be so proud to have read this.
Wow.
And I've held on to that email for years. It just really meant the world to me. And when I get letters from, I always answer every letter from any fan who writes to me, even when they're complaining
Uh-huh.
about, why did you say that? And why'd you use bad language? I will always write back because it matters.
And I think it's actually even more important to write back to the ones that disagree with you. That shows your dedication to the cause.
I wrote back to somebody in The Murderer's Daughters. Somebody said they loved it so much, but she didn't like the snipe I wrote against Republicans. And I wrote back to her and I said, I appreciate what you're saying. And that's a valid point because it took you out of the story. But just, FYI, that was the point of view of the character.
Yeah.
And we ended up having a really nice back and forth.
That's great. And let's face it, most people will assume that the viewpoints of the characters are the author's own. And I often have to ask people, no, you obviously didn't. This is what you put in for the plot to succeed. They had to say this and be this way. So excellent. I'm getting close to time. We'll have to run out of here, but I want to make sure that we mention websites, blogs, all the stuff that you do.
You can find me. I'm very accessible on randysusanmeyers.com. I have a newsletter that comes out pretty regularly, and I try to not make it me, me, me. I give like skincare tips, socially active places where you can buy Christmas presents that, are helping the world, and I really enjoy that. I write on Substack, and I'm very accessible.
I can see that, and you're also a whole lot of fun to talk with.
Oh, and so are you. This has been like one of the best. My goodness. I'm going to always tell them to make sure I get on this show. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. As I say, you're author number 862 interview, and it's kind of nice at the elderly stage that I am to discover something you're pretty decent at that you didn't know a talent you might have had before. And I do read every book, so
Oh,
that's why I have so much fun with it because I can talk about hopefully fairly knowledgeably.
well, I'm going to subscribe to you now and watch all the past episodes.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're in for trouble, but that'll keep you and your husband together for a long time. I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Our guest today is Randy Susan Myers, The Many Mothers of Ivy Puddingstone. It is a highly recommended book. Please go out and buy it. Share it with your friends. This is important stuff. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.